The cracks beneath the surface. The first sign was a missed call. Just one, on a Tuesday afternoon, from an unknown number. But it sat there on Emma's phone, glaring and accusing, as if it knew what she didn't. She ignored it, sliding her phone back into her purse, brushing it off as a wrong number. But days later, the second call came, this time at night, when her husband Daniel was supposedly working late at the office. She answered, but there was only silence on the other end before. The call abruptly disconnected. Daniel had been distant lately, a vague tension lingering between them. She had noticed it in the way his eyes seemed to flit away from hers during dinner, how his laugh felt hollow, as if his mind were somewhere else. She wanted to confront him, but the words always lodged in her throat, fear suffocating her voice. Weeks passed, the air between them growing colder, brittle. Emma felt the distance widen, felt it in the empty side of the bed when Daniel started sleeping on the couch to get better rest. She clung to her routines, as if folding laundry and preparing meals could stitch together the unraveling seams of their marriage. Then she found the text message. It was buried in a thread from his assistant, but it didn't read like a professional exchange. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again. Same hotel?" Emma's vision blurred, the world tilting on its axis. Her fingers trembled as she dropped his phone back on the kitchen counter, fighting the nausea that threatened to consume her. Her heart shattered, splintering into jagged shards, but anger quickly followed, hot and searing. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but she felt trapped, suffocating under the weight of her suspicions. Instead, she waited. She watched him, scrutinized every word, every movement. She noticed how he guarded his phone, how he left for work earlier and came home later. She kept silent, collecting pieces of evidence, waiting for the moment she could confront him without doubt. But the pain was corrosive, eating away at her. She became distant, her smiles forced, her affection mechanical. Daniel noticed. He would reach for her, but she would stiffen, her body recoiling from his touch. "Are you okay?" he asked one night, his voice tinged with concern. Emma looked at him, her eyes cold and distant. "Are you?" Her question hung heavy in the air, laden, with accusations she didn't dare voice. Daniel opened his mouth as if to speak, but hesitated, his eyes shifting away. That was all the answer she needed. She hired a private investigator the next day. It felt drastic, underhanded, but she needed the truth. She needed to see it with her own eyes, to feel the final blow that would sever the last threads of trust. Fool. Report came back a week later, manila envelope heavy in her hands. She opened it alone, sitting on their bed, their marital bed, as she flipped through the photographs. Daniel with another woman, their faces close, their hands intertwined. They looked happy. She was young, beautiful, everything Emma feared she no longer was. A cold numbness settled over her, and she felt herself shatter into 1,000 pieces. She cried then, her body racked with sobs that left her hollow and shaking. But once the tears dried, a resolve took their place. When Daniel came home that night, she was waiting for him, the photographs spread out on the kitchen table. He froze in the doorway, his face draining of color, eyes widening with panic. "You were going to tell me when?" Emma's voice was calm, eerily so, the calm before the storm. I didn't. Emma, don't lie to me. Not now. I deserve better than that." He closed his mouth, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his guilt. He sat down slowly, his hands trembling as he reached for one of the photos. "I never meant to hurt you. But you did. You destroyed everything." "How long?" "A year." The word hit her like a physical blow, and she flinched. She stood, backing away from him, needing distance. "Why?" His eyes were wet, his voice cracking. "I was lost. We were distant. I felt like I was fading, like you didn't see me anymore." "So you found someone who did." It wasn't a question, just a statement of fact. Daniel nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. It was a mistake, a terrible, selfish mistake. I never stopped loving you. Emma's laugh was bitter, hollow. You don't betray someone you love. She turned away, unable to look at him, at his tear-streaked face, his brokenness. She was shattered too, but she had no sympathy for his pain. Not when she was drowning in her own. She walked out that night, leaving him alone in their house, surrounded by the remnants of their life together. She went to her sister's, seeking refuge, seeking solace. But sleep was elusive, and her mind spun in endless circles of anger, pain, and loss. Days passed before she finally returned, her decision made. She would confront him one last time, lay everything bare. She found him in the kitchen. Emma moved through the days like a ghost, present but hollow, her body performing the motions of life while her mind remained tangled in the past. She went back to work, throwing herself into spreadsheets and client meetings, hoping that the distraction would dull the pain. It helped, but only for a while. The ache was always there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for a quiet moment to rise and suffocate her. Her sister Melissa checked on her daily, her visits a lifeline, a reminder that she wasn't completely alone. They sat together drinking tea in Emma's kitchen, talking about anything but Daniel. It was an unspoken rule, a fragile boundary that kept Emma from falling apart. One afternoon, as rain pattered against the windows, Melissa broke the silence. He called me. Emma's body stiffened, her fingers tightening around her mug. Why? He's worried about you. Says you won't answer his calls, won't respond to his texts. He doesn't get to be worried, not after what he did. Her voice was cold, sharper than she intended. Melissa sighed, placing her hand over Emma's. I'm not defending him, Em. I don't know. I hate seeing you like this. Emma's expression softened, guilt gnawing at her. I'm trying. It feels like he took everything from me. Not just our marriage, but who I was. I don't even know who I am without him. That's the lie, Melissa said softly. You were you before him, and you'll be you after him. The words stayed with her, echoing in her mind long after Melissa left. They felt true, but distant, like a memory she couldn't quite touch. Weeks passed, and she continued to ignore Daniel's messages, her heart clenching. Every time his name lit up her phone, she thought about blocking him but couldn't bring herself to sever that last fragile thread. Then one evening he showed up at her door. His eyes were hollow, his face drawn, and Emma felt a twisted satisfaction at his brokenness. But it didn't ease her pain. If anything, it made her feel worse. I need to talk to you, Daniel said, his voice raw, pleading. Please, Emma. She wanted to slam the door in his face, to shout at him, to demand why she wasn't enough. But her anger was tangled with pain, with love, with all the things she couldn't untangle. She stepped back, letting him in, hating herself for her weakness. They sat in the living room, the air heavy with unspoken words. Daniel looked around, his eyes lingering on the photos that still hung on the walls, memories of the life they built together. He looked as if he were mourning them, and Emma realized she was too. I'm sorry, he began, his voice cracking. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know how sorry I am, for everything. Emma's jaw tightened, anger flaring. You didn't just hurt me, Daniel, you destroyed me. You took my trust, my love, and you burned it. You made me doubt everything. He flinched, his shoulders sagging. I was a coward. I was selfish. I let my insecurities destroy us. But it wasn't your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Then why wasn't I enough? You were, he said, his voice breaking. You always were. I was the one who wasn't enough. I was lost and I thought she could fill the emptiness inside me, but it was a lie. She was just a distraction. You were always my home. Emma looked away, her chest tightening. She had wanted to hear those words, but they didn't heal her. They only reopened the wound. I don't know if I can forgive you. Daniel swallowed, his eyes pleading. I'll wait. I'll wait as long as it takes. I want to fix this. Fix us. She shook her head, her heart breaking all over again. I don't know if we can be fixed. I don't even know who we are anymore. They sat in silence, the weight of his betrayal suffocating them both. After a while, Daniel stood, his shoulders heavy with defeat. I understand. I won't push you, but I'm not giving up on us. I still believe we can find our way back. Emma looked at him, her heart aching. I don't know if I believe that. His face crumpled, but he nodded, accepting her words. He walked to the door, hesitating. If you ever want to talk, I'll be here, always. She didn't answer, her eyes fixed on the floor as the door closed behind him. She listened to his footsteps fading away, the echo of his presence lingering long after he was gone. The tears finally fell, and she sank to the floor, her body shaking as she sobbed. She was grieving for him, for them, for everything they were supposed to be. But beneath the grief was anger, still burning, still alive. That night, she pulled out a box from the closet, filled with their memories. Photos, letters, mementos of their life together. She sat on the floor, sorting through them, each piece, a reminder of what they once had. She thought about burning it all, about erasing him from her life. But she couldn't. Not yet. She wasn't ready to let go. In the days that followed, Emma prepared herself for the confrontation she knew was inevitable. She replayed their last conversation over and over, his words echoing in her mind. I'll wait. I'll wait as long as it takes. She didn't know if she wanted him to wait, didn't know if she could ever trust him again, but she needed answers, real answers, not just apologies and confessions of guilt. She needed to understand how he could look her in the eyes every day while lying to her face. She texted him a week later, a short, cold message. We need to talk. Saturday. 3 p.m. Here. There was no room for debate, no warmth, just a directive. He responded almost instantly. I'll be there. When Saturday came, she paced the living room, anxiety knotting in her stomach. She kept rehearsing what she would say, how she would stay calm, how she wouldn't let him see her pain. But her heart was a traitor, hammering in her chest at the thought of seeing him again. The doorbell rang, sharp and jarring, breaking her spiral of thoughts. She took a deep breath, steeling herself before opening the door. Daniel stood on the porch, his face haggard, shadows under his eyes. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, his shoulders hunched as if carrying a weight too heavy to bear. He met her gaze, his eyes flickering with pain, hope, and guilt. Come in, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. She stepped back, letting him pass. The familiar scent of his cologne hitting her like a punch to the chest. She shut the door, leaning against it for a moment to gather herself before turning to face him. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, an expanse of cold wood separating them. Emma folded her arms, her posture rigid, defensive. Daniel's hands were clasped tightly, his fingers turning white with pressure. He looked like he was waiting for a verdict. I don't want excuses, she said, her voice steady. I don't want to hear about your insecurities or how lost you were. I want the truth. All of it. Who was she? Daniel flinched, his eyes dropping to the table. Her name is Julia. We met at work. She's in marketing. It started as just conversations. I didn't even realize. He trailed off, his voice breaking. Emma's jaw tightened, but she forced herself to remain calm. How long? He looked up, his face crumpling. 8 months. It was on and off. I ended it before you found out. I knew it was wrong. I knew I was destroying us. 8 months. It felt like a slap to the face, the timeline unraveling in her mind, tainting every memory from the past year. Did you love her? No, he said quickly, his voice desperate. It wasn't love. It was an escape. From my own failures, my own fears. It was never about her. It was never about you not being enough. I was the one who wasn't enough. Emma's throat tightened, the words cutting deep. Did you ever think about me? About us? Did you think about what it would do to me? His shoulders shook, his head dropping. Every day. And every day I hated myself for it. But I didn't know how to stop. I was selfish. I was weak. And I broke the one person who never deserved it. Silence hung between them, heavy and suffocating. Emma stared at him, trying to reconcile this broken man with the husband she thought she knew. She searched his face, looking for signs of the betrayal she should have seen, but never did. Finally she spoke, her voice cold, steady. I needed you. When my mother died when I was falling apart, I needed you. And you were with her. Daniel's face crumpled, tears sliding down his cheeks. I know I failed you. And I hate myself for it. If I could take it all back, if I could undo the pain I caused you, I would. But I can't. I can't fix this. All I can do is tell you how sorry I am. Emma looked away, her eyes burning. She wouldn't cry, not in front of him. Not again. Sorry doesn't change what you did. Sorry doesn't change that I'll never be able to look at you the same way again. He didn't argue. He just sat there, his body shaking, his guilt raw and exposed. I miss you, Emma. I miss us. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to try. I want to fight for us. She closed her eyes, his words piercing through her. She wanted to believe him, God. She wanted to believe him. But she didn't trust herself anymore. She didn't trust her own heart. I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. I'll wait, he whispered, his voice cracking. No matter how long it takes. I'll wait. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. You should go. Her voice was cold, final. She couldn't do this anymore. She needed space, needed air. Daniel stood slowly, his body heavy with grief. He walked to the door, hesitating, as if hoping she would call him back. When she didn't, he whispered, I'm sorry, before stepping out and closing the door behind him. The silence that followed was suffocating. Emma sank to the floor. Days turned into weeks, and the void Daniel left behind grew heavier, more suffocating. Emma tried to fill it with work, with friends, with long walks through the neighborhood where everything reminded her of him. She kept expecting to see his car in the driveway, to hear his key turning in the lock. But the house remained silent, each room echoing with the absence of his presence. She didn't know how to stop loving him. She didn't know how to stop missing the life they'd built. Together, the memories now tainted by his betrayal. She tried to be angry, tried to hate him, but the pain always overpowered the anger, leaving her feeling hollow and lost. One evening, she came home to find a package on the porch, wrapped neatly with her name written in Daniel's handwriting. She hesitated before picking it up, her heart racing, hands trembling. She carried it inside, setting it on the kitchen table before pacing back and forth, debating whether to open it or throw it away. Curiosity won. She tore the paper, revealing a leather-bound journal with a note tucked inside. Emma, this is my truth. The whole truth. I don't know if it will change anything, but you deserve to know. No more lies. No more excuses. I'm laying it all bare. Because I can't keep running from what I did. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just need you to understand. I love you. Always. Daniel. Her hands shook as she opened the journal, flipping through the pages filled with his handwriting, messy and raw. It was a chronicle of his affair, from the first flirtation to the guilt that gnawed at him every day. He confessed to every lie, every deception, detailing the ways he justified his actions to himself, the ways he convinced himself it didn't mean anything, but it did mean something. It meant everything. He wrote about how he fell apart when his career stagnated, how he felt like a failure, like he was losing his purpose. How he turned to Julia to escape his own self-loathing, to feel wanted, needed. He wrote about the shame that followed every encounter, the self-hatred that grew with every lie he told Emma. There were passages filled with anguish, with regret, with love. He wrote about the day Emma's mother died, how he hated himself for not being there for her because he was too busy wallowing in his own misery. He wrote about watching her grieve, wanting to comfort her but feeling like he didn't deserve to. He wrote about feeling like he was already losing her and how that fear drove him further into his own mistakes. As she read, tears streamed down her face, dripping onto the pages, smudging his words. She wanted to throw the journal across the room, to scream, to hate him. But she couldn't, because for the first time, she saw him, really saw him. Not as the man who betrayed her, but as a man who was broken long before he broke her. A man who didn't know how to ask for help, who ran from his pain and destroyed everything in his wake. She didn't know if it made a difference. She didn't know if it changed anything. But she finally understood. She closed the journal, her heart aching, her mind spinning. She was still hurt, still angry, still shattered. But she was no longer lost. She knew where the pain came from, now knew where his betrayal was rooted. She spent the night crying, mourning the life she thought they had, the man she thought she knew. But by morning she felt a glimmer of clarity, of acceptance. She wasn't ready to forgive him. She wasn't ready to take him back. But she was ready to let go of the hate. A week later she called him, her voice steady, firm. "We need to talk." They met at a small cafe on the outskirts of town, away from familiar faces and painful memories. Daniel looked weary, his shoulders slumped, his eyes dull. But when he saw her, a spark of hope flickered in his gaze. "I read it," she said, sliding the journal across the table. "All of it." He swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he touched the cover. "I wanted you to know the truth, no more lies." "I know," she said softly, "and I believe you." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I still don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can trust you again. But I understand why you did it, and that helps. It helps me let go of the anger." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "I never wanted to hurt you. I was just too broken to see that I was hurting myself too." Emma looked at him, seeing the man she fell in love with, the man who was flawed, who was lost, but who was trying to find his way back. "You need to fix yourself, Daniel. Not for me, not for us, but for you. You need to face your demons, and you need to heal. I can't do that for you." He nodded, his voice trembling. "I know. I'm trying. I've started seeing a therapist. I'm trying to be better, to be the man you deserved." She looked away, tears stinging her eyes. "I don't know if we can ever get back to what we were. I don't know if we should. But I hope you find peace. And maybe one day." Months passed, and Emma began to piece her life back together, slowly but deliberately. She focused on herself, on healing, on rediscovering who she was outside of her marriage. She took up painting again, filling canvases with bold strokes of color, pouring her emotions into each brushstroke. She reconnected with friends she'd lost touch with, began to build a new support system around herself. She saw Daniel occasionally, mostly at the lawyer's office as they navigated the logistics of their separation. They were cordial, polite even, but always guarded, the wound still too raw to risk any deeper conversation. But every once in a while, she'd catch a glimpse of the man she used to love, the way his eyes softened when he spoke of his sisters. New baby? The way he still carried himself with that quiet confidence that had once drawn her to him. It hurt, seeing those pieces of him, because they were reminders of what they'd lost. Still, she moved forward day by day, piece by piece. She went on a date once with a man she met at a gallery opening. He was kind, charming, and made her laugh. But when he reached for her hand, she pulled away, an instinctive flinch she hadn't expected. She wasn't ready yet, wasn't healed enough to let someone new in. One evening, she sat on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. She sipped her tea, feeling the warmth seep through the ceramic cup and into her hands. It was peaceful, the quiet wrapping around her like a comforting blanket. Her phone buzzed, breaking the stillness. She glanced at the screen, her heart skipping a beat when she saw Daniel's name. She hesitated, her thumb hovering over the message notification before finally opening it. "I hope you're doing okay. I just wanted you to know that I signed the papers today. It's official. I won't bother you again, but I needed you to know that I'm sorry. For everything. I hope you find happiness, Emma. You deserve it." She stared at the message, her heart aching in a way she thought she'd moved past. She hadn't expected it to hurt so much, to feel so final. She knew it was over, that their marriage was in the past, but seeing it in writing made it real in a way she wasn't prepared for. She thought about ignoring the message, about letting that be the end of it, but she couldn't. She owed him an answer, even if it was just to close this chapter for good. "Thank you, Daniel. I hope you find peace. I hope you heal. Take care of yourself." She hit send before she could second-guess herself, then set the phone down, her chest feeling tight, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. She didn't regret her choice. She knew it was the right decision, the only decision that would allow her to truly move on, but that didn't make it hurt any less. A few days later, she ran into Julia at the grocery store. It was bound to happen eventually. Brookdale was too small to avoid people forever. But the sight of the other woman standing in the produce aisle, examining a carton of strawberries, sent a jolt of anger through her. Emma almost turned around, almost walked out without her groceries. But then Julia looked up, her eyes widening, in shock before shame flooded her face. She looked smaller somehow, worn down. "Emma, I didn't expect to see you here." Julia's voice was tentative, hesitant. Emma set her basket down, her heart pounding. "It's a small town. We were bound to run into each other eventually." Julia looked down, guilt etched across her features. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to happen." Emma's jaw clenched, a surge of anger, rising up hot and bitter. "You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed my marriage. You lied to my face. You pretended to be my friend while you were sleeping with my husband." Julia's eyes filled with tears. "I know. I was selfish. I was miserable, and I made terrible choices, but that doesn't excuse what I did. I'm so sorry." Emma stared at her, the woman who had shattered her life, who had been the face of betrayal. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to make Julia feel even a fraction of the pain she'd endured. But she didn't. Instead, she took a deep breath, letting the anger flow through her, then out. "I don't forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I'm not going to let you have power over me anymore. You were a part of my life once, and now you're not. I hope you figure out who you are. Julia, I hope you become someone better than this." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Julia standing alone, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't closure, not exactly, but it was a step forward. Another piece of herself reclaimed. Months later, Emma sat on her porch again, a canvas. In front of her, paint staining her fingers as she worked on a new piece. It was vibrant, alive, full of color and movement. It was a reflection of her journey, of the pain, the loss, the healing. She was still scarred, still mending, but she was moving forward. Emma sat frozen, her mind reeling, the air thick with the weight of Marcus's words. It felt like the floor was crumbling beneath her, leaving her suspended in a void where nothing made sense anymore. She had never connected the dots. Never. Realized the affair that had shattered her sister's life was connected to Julia's vengeance. How could she have known? How could she have seen that Julia had been carrying a grudge this deep, this destructive? You and my sister? Emma's voice wavered, the question fragile and broken. You were the one she... Marcus nodded, his face a mask of regret. We were reckless, stupid. I was married. She was vulnerable, and you exposed us. He swallowed hard, his eyes darkening. I lost everything, my wife, my kids, my reputation, and Julia blamed you. She never forgave you for that. A cold shiver ran down Emma's spine, her heart, splintering under the weight of betrayal layered on top of betrayal. I didn't know. I didn't mean to. But you did. Marcus cut in, his voice sharp, his gaze piercing. You told your parents. They told my wife. It all came crashing down. And Julia, she lost her brother. I was everything to her, and you took me away. Emma felt sick, a hollow ache blooming in her chest. She had thought she was doing the right thing by telling her parents the truth, by protecting her sister from a man who had taken advantage of her vulnerability. She had never imagined the fallout, never imagined that Julia would turn that pain back on her in the most vicious way possible. That's why she went after Daniel? Emma's voice was a whisper, a broken plea for understanding. To punish me? Marcus looked away, his jaw clenching. She saw how happy you were, how perfect your life seemed, and she hated you for it. She wanted you to feel the same pain she felt, the same betrayal. He looked back at her, his eyes cold, empty. So, she seduced your husband. She made him fall in love with her. And then she made sure you found out. Emma's stomach churned, the room spinning around her. It wasn't just an affair. It was a calculated act of revenge, orchestrated to destroy her, to make her suffer. And Julia had succeeded. She had torn Emma's life apart, shattered her marriage, and left her questioning everything she thought she knew about love and loyalty. All because of a secret Emma hadn't even known she was keeping. You were collateral damage. Marcus continued, his voice hollow. Daniel was just a pawn. None of it was real. It was all about you, about breaking you. Emma's hands trembled, her vision blurring as tears burned at the corners of her eyes. And you let her do it? You knew all of this and you said nothing? Marcus's face twisted with guilt, his shoulders slumping. I didn't know how far she would go. Not at first. And by the time I did, it was too late. She was too far gone, too consumed by her hatred for you. Emma's breath hitched, pain radiating through her chest. She had been living a lie. Her whole life had been a lie, twisted and manipulated by a woman she had trusted, a friend she had loved. How could she hate me that much? Emma choked out, her voice breaking. How could she destroy my life and feel nothing? Marcus looked at her, his expression somber, haunted. Because she thought you destroyed hers first, and she wanted you to feel the same emptiness, the same loss. Emma's world crumbled, her heart shattering into pieces she couldn't hope to put back together. How could she forgive this? How could she move on, knowing that Julia's betrayal had been so calculated, so cruel? She looked at Marcus, the man who had started it all, the man whose choices had set off a chain reaction that had torn her life apart. "Why are you telling me this now?" she demanded, anger flaring through her grief. "Why not sooner? Why wait until everything was already ruined?" Marcus looked away, shame shadowing his face. "Because I was a coward. Because I couldn't face what I'd done. Because I didn't want you to hate me too." Emma's chest tightened, her emotions a tangled mess of anger, grief, and betrayal. "I hate you now," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I hate all of you. You, Julia, Daniel. You took everything from me." Marcus's shoulders slumped, his face etched with pain. "I know, and I don't expect your forgiveness. I just thought you deserved the truth, even if it destroys you." Emma stood, her knees shaking, her heart heavy with the weight of everything she had lost. "It already did," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You're just here to finish the job." She walked out of the cafe, her vision blurred with tears, her mind racing with memories tainted by lies. Everything she thought she knew was gone, shattered by the truth she never saw coming. As she stumbled down the street, her heart aching, her mind spiraling, she realized she was completely, utterly alone, and she had no idea how to put the pieces of her life back together. Emma drove aimlessly for hours, her mind racing with questions that had no answers. How could she have been so blind? How had she missed the signs? Her best friend and her husband, two people she had trusted more than anyone, had shattered her world, leaving her to pick up the broken pieces. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Marcus. She almost didn't answer, but then remembered his face at the cafe, the look of guilt and regret. He had known, and he had kept it from her. But he had also warned her, in his own subtle way. She pressed the phone to her ear, her voice low and raw. "What do you want?" Marcus's voice was strained, hesitant. "Emma, I heard you found out about Daniel and Julia." "Of course you knew," she snapped, bitterness coating her words. "You knew, and you didn't say anything. You watched me suffer, and you did nothing. I didn't know how," Marcus admitted, his voice cracking. "I didn't want to be the one to break your heart. But I couldn't stand seeing you in the dark anymore. That's why I met with you today. I wanted to tell you. I just didn't have the courage." "Courage?" Emma laughed, the sound cold and hollow. "You were too much of a coward to tell me the truth, but you were brave enough to look me in the eyes and lie. Some friend you are." There was silence on the other end, the weight of her accusation hanging heavy between them. "I deserve that," Marcus finally said, his voice heavy with remorse. "I deserve every bit of anger you have for me. But Emma, you don't know the whole story." Emma's grip on the steering wheel tightened, her knuckles turning white. "What are you talking about?" "Julia, she didn't just manipulate Daniel. She used me, too." Emma's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Marcus sighed, his voice filled with regret. "She asked me to keep an eye on you. She said you were acting distant, that she was worried about you. But then she started asking questions about where you went, who you were with, things that didn't make sense. At first I thought she was just concerned, but then I realized she was using me to make you look guilty, to justify her affair with Daniel." Emma's head spun, a sickening feeling churning in her stomach. "She made it look like I was the one being unfaithful?" "She planted doubts in Daniel's mind," Marcus continued, his voice pained. "She told him you were distant, distracted, that you were hiding something. She twisted things to make him question your loyalty. And when he started to believe it, she made her move." Emma felt the air leave her lungs, the weight of Julia's betrayal pressing down on her. It wasn't. Just an affair. It was a calculated plan to destroy her marriage, to take everything she held dear. "How long?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "How long has this been going on?" "A year," Marcus confessed. "Maybe longer. I didn't piece it all together until recently, but by then, the damage was done. A year. 12 months of lies, deception, manipulation. 12 months of thinking Julia was her best friend, her confidant, her sister in all but blood. And all along, Julia had been plotting her downfall. Emma's eyes burned with unshed tears, her heart breaking anew. Why would she do this? Why would she hurt me like this? I don't know, Marcus admitted. But I think it's more than jealousy. It's obsession. She wanted what you had. She wanted your life. Emma's hands trembled on the steering wheel, her mind reeling. Julia had envied her, resented her, and had torn her life apart to take her place. It was madness. It was cruelty, beyond anything she could have imagined. "I'm so sorry, Emma." Marcus's voice broke, guilt heavy in his words. "I should have told you sooner. I should have protected you. But I was too weak, too afraid of losing my friendship with you, and too scared of Julia." Emma closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I trusted you, Marcus. I trusted all of you. And you betrayed me." "I know," he whispered, his voice cracking, "and I'll never forgive myself for that." Emma hung up, her body shaking as the truth settled around her, cold and suffocating. She had been played, used. Her life was a lie, her marriage a sham. And the woman she had once called her sister was the one who had orchestrated it all. She didn't know where to go, where to turn. Her house wasn't a home anymore. Her friends were tainted by lies. Her husband was a stranger. She drove aimlessly, until she found herself at the edge of town, near the cliffs that overlooked the ocean. She parked and stumbled out of the car, the cold wind biting at her skin as she walked to the edge, staring down at the crashing waves below. Everything felt surreal, like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. She felt lost, untethered, her life shattered beyond recognition. And yet somewhere deep inside, she felt a flicker of something else. Anger, determination, a will to survive. Julia had tried to take everything from her, but she wouldn't let her win. Emma stood at the edge of the cliff for a moment longer, feeling the salty wind whip through her hair, the roar of the ocean echoing her turmoil. She let the anger surge through her, fueling her resolve. Julia had stolen her trust, her marriage, her sense of safety, but she wouldn't let her take her dignity. She drove home, her mind racing with possibilities. Confronting Daniel outright was tempting, but she needed more than an emotional outburst. She needed to understand the full extent of Julia's deception, to see how deep the betrayal ran. She needed proof. The house was dark when she arrived, Daniel's car conspicuously absent. A familiar ache stabbed at her. He was probably with Julia, continuing their affair without remorse. But this time the pain didn't paralyze her. It hardened into purpose. She moved quickly, her actions precise, methodical. In their shared office, she powered on Daniel's laptop, her fingers shaking only slightly as she guessed his password. After a few failed attempts, she tried Julia 89, Julia's birth year. The desktop unlocked. Emma laughed bitterly. Of course. His emails revealed a trail of secrets she could barely stomach. Late-night messages, intimate photos, confessions of love, all sent under the guise of business meetings and work trips. But it was the planning that hurt the most. They had strategized ways to keep Emma in the dark, weaving a web of lies designed to gaslight her, to make her question her own sanity. She scrolled further, finding financial statements that didn't add up. Money transferred from their joint account to a private one under Daniel's name. A second phone line she hadn't known about, likely used for his clandestine conversations with Julia. Receipts for hotel rooms, jewelry, gifts. all meant for her best friend. Emma's hands shook with fury. They hadn't just betrayed her emotionally, they'd stolen from her, siphoning off her trust and her money to fund their affair. Her chest tightened, and for a moment she felt dizzy, as if the walls were closing in on her. But she forced herself to breathe, to stay focused. She copied everything onto a flash drive, backing up every damning detail. If Julia and Daniel wanted to play dirty, she could play just as hard. A noise at the front door made her freeze. Daniel was home. She quickly shut down the laptop, pocketing the flash drive as she slipped out of the office. He walked in, his face a mask of practiced normalcy, but when he saw her standing there, arms crossed, his expression faltered. "Emma, I didn't expect you to be up." "I bet you didn't," she said coolly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "Late night at the office?" His eyes flickered with panic. "Yeah. Things have been busy." She almost laughed at how easily the lies rolled off his tongue. "Busy, huh? With Julia?" His face went pale. What are you talking about?" Emma took a step closer, her eyes burning into his. "I know, Daniel. I know everything. You and Julia. How long has it been? A year? Longer?" His jaw dropped, guilt flooding his features. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, at a loss for words. "Don't bother denying it," she said, her voice icy. "I saw the emails, the photos, all of it. You lied to my face over and over again. You let me believe I was losing my mind while you and my so-called best friend stabbed me in the back." Daniel's shoulders sagged, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. "Emma, why?" Her voice broke, the hurt seeping through her anger. Was it worth it? Was she worth everything we built together? His eyes dropped to the floor, shame coloring his face. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. It just happened. I never meant to hurt you." "Did you really think I wouldn't?" "Find out?" she demanded, her voice rising. "You were going to leave me, weren't you? Just pack up and walk away?" He flinched, his silence confirming her worst fears. The betrayal cut deeper than she could have imagined. It wasn't just the affair. It was the cruelty of his lies, the way he had tried to erase her from his life without even giving her the dignity of the truth. She shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "I loved you, Daniel. I trusted you. And you threw it all away for her." He took a step closer, his eyes pleading. "Emma, I'm so sorry. I was selfish. I was weak. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can—" "Don't." She put up a hand, stopping him cold. "Don't pretend this can be fixed. You didn't just break my heart. You destroyed my trust. You made a fool out of me." His shoulders slumped, his eyes glistening with tears. "I never wanted to hurt you," Emma laughed bitterly. "But you did. You hurt me more than I ever thought possible." She took a shaky breath, steeling herself. "I'm leaving. I'll send someone to get my things. Consider this marriage over." His face crumpled, panic flashing across his features. "Emma, wait!" "No!" She turned on her heel, heading for the door. The road stretched ahead, empty and dark, the headlights slicing through the night like a lone ship on a vast ocean. Emma's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white. The world outside felt distant, a blur of streetlights and shadowed trees, as if her reality had shifted. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and the raw sting of betrayal. But beneath it all, there was a strange sense of clarity that had begun to form in the cracks of her grief. She had been broken, yes, but she was still whole enough to rebuild. And whatever the future held, she refused to let this moment define her. As she passed through the sleepy suburban town where she and Daniel had once dreamed of growing old, a familiar place that no longer felt like home, she saw a sign for a hotel. She hadn't planned on stopping, but the impulse was there. Something in her needed to pause, to breathe without the weight of everything pressing on her chest. She pulled into the parking lot, the dull glow of the neon sign casting an eerie light across the lot. She parked in a corner, far from the few other cars scattered around. The idea of being alone in a strange place felt both comforting and unsettling. Stepping out of the car, she stretched her legs and walked inside. The lobby smelled of stale coffee and bleach, a sterile ambiance that felt out of place with the turmoil inside her. The receptionist, a young woman with tired eyes, gave her a quick, polite smile as Emma asked for a room. She didn't bother with small talk, just paid and took the key without hesitation. The room was small, the walls thin, but it was enough. She dropped her bag on the bed and sat down, her hands trembling as she fumbled for her phone. There was a message from Julia. It made Emma's stomach turn, but she opened it anyway. "I don't expect forgiveness, Emma, but I owe you the truth. I've never meant for things to go this far. Daniel and we're not the people you think we are, but please, let's talk. We can work this out." She stared at the screen. For a long moment, her mind spinning. Talk? Work it out? What could they possibly have to say that would undo the years of lies and deceit? But then she remembered the flash drive in her bag, the evidence she had painstakingly gathered, the photos, the receipts, the emails. Julia wanted to talk. She would have to answer for what she'd done. Emma deleted the message without a second thought, a grim satisfaction settling in her chest. She wasn't going to be anyone's victim anymore. She didn't need their hollow apologies or their excuses. She needed peace, and that was something they couldn't give her. Her phone buzzed, again this time from Daniel. "Please, Emma, I'm sorry, let's talk. We can fix this. I'll do anything to make it right." She stared at the screen, the words searing into her like acid. Fix it? How could he even ask? But then another part of her, the part that still loved him, that still longed for the man she had married, whispered that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. Not with him, but with herself. Emma put the phone face down on the bed, the temptation to reply burning in her chest. But this wasn't about him. This was about her reclaiming the life she had been forced to give up. Her thoughts turned to the future. What would it look like now? Would she go back to her old life, pretending like none of this ever happened? Or would she step into something new, something completely hers? Her eyes drifted to the window. The night was quiet, save for the occasional car driving by. She needed time to think, to breathe without the weight of Daniel's lies. She couldn't make any decisions yet, not when everything was still so raw. But one thing was certain. This was the first step of her new life. She lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed again, but she ignored it. Tomorrow was a new day, and with it the possibility of something better. But tonight, she would let herself feel everything, the hurt, the anger, the sadness, because tomorrow she would be free. The thought lingered in her mind, settling into her chest like a balm. She wasn't going to let them define her. She would heal, step by painful step, until one day she woke up and realized she was no longer trapped in the pain of the past. The phone buzzed one last time, but she didn't look at it. She didn't need to. The truth was clear now. Her journey was just beginning, and she would walk it alone. The night seemed to stretch on forever. Emma lay in the hotel room, staring at the ceiling, her mind a battlefield of emotions and decisions. The silence around her felt almost suffocating, but there was a strange sense of freedom in it, too. She didn't have to answer anyone's questions, didn't have to consider anyone else's feelings. For once, the world was hers to navigate without interference. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. This time, she hesitated before reaching for it. It was Daniel. His name on the screen still had the power to twist her gut. She swiped the screen open, but instead of a message, she found a call coming through. Her heart skipped a beat. He hadn't called her in days. Was this the moment? The moment when he begged, when he finally told her everything she needed to hear? Or was it more of the same? More lies, more excuses? She stared at the phone for several seconds, the weight of her decision, pressing down on her. Would she answer it? Could she hear him out without crumbling? Against her better judgment, she answered the call, her voice trembling before she even spoke. "Daniel." There was a brief silence on the other end, followed by a sharp intake of breath. She could hear the strain in his voice, the guilt, the desperation. "Emma," he said, his voice cracked. "I don't know what to say anymore, but I'm so sorry. I can't stand what I've done. I can't take back what happened, but please, let me explain. Let me fix this." The words felt hollow, like a script he had rehearsed over and over again. She closed her eyes and leaned back against the bed, feeling the tears well up despite herself. "Explain?" she whispered, almost to herself. "What's left to explain, Daniel? You slept with Julia. You lied to me. You destroyed everything. We built together. You've shattered me, and I don't even know who you are anymore." His voice broke. I know, and I can't change it. But I need you to know. This wasn't about you. I made a mistake. I let things spiral, and I thought I could control it, but I couldn't. It was never about not loving you. I love you, Emma. I always have. Then why? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Why her? Why Julia? Daniel was silent for a long time, and Emma could almost hear the weight of his shame on the other end. "I don't know. I lost myself, Emma. It wasn't her, it was me. I wasn't the man I used to be. I was angry and empty, and I didn't know how to talk to you anymore. I made a terrible choice. But I never wanted to hurt you. Never." Emma pressed her palm to her forehead, trying to steady her breath. Her pulse was quick, her heart racing, but beneath all of the anger, there was something else. Something familiar. That old love. The love she thought was long gone. "Is that it?" she asked quietly. "Is that your excuse? You were angry? You didn't know how to talk to me?" "Emma." Daniel's voice softened. "Please don't hang up. I need you to know that I'm committed to making things right. I'm willing to do anything. I'll go to therapy. I'll take responsibility. I'll do the work if you'll just stop." Emma's voice was sharp, interrupting him. "You think therapy can fix this? You think your apologies are enough to undo the damage you've done?" She paused, swallowing hard, the tightness in her chest becoming unbearable. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Daniel. You've broken me, and I don't even know who I am anymore." Another long silence passed between them, but this time it wasn't the silence of her retreat. It was his. He didn't know how to answer her, didn't know how to make it right. "I know," he said quietly. "I know, and I can't fix it. But please, don't give up on me. Don't give up on us. I swear, I'll do whatever it takes." Emma's heart was pounding, the weight of his words crashing into her with all the force of a tidal wave. She wanted to believe him. God, how badly she wanted to believe him. But part of her, the stronger part, the part that had been silently rebuilding herself for the past few days, knew that it wasn't that simple. "Goodbye, Daniel," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I can't do this right now. I need time, and I don't think I can ever go back to what we were." There was no response from his side of the line. The silence felt deafening as Emma disconnected the call. She sat there, phone in her hand, staring at the empty screen for a long moment, her chest tight. She didn't feel relief. She didn't feel peace. She felt nothing. Maybe this was what healing looked like. A sharp, jagged edge of nothingness, where once there had been everything. Her phone buzzed again, but she ignored it. She knew who it was. And for the first time in days, Emma felt something akin to clarity. Not because she had answers, but because she was done searching for them. She was done with the lies, done with the hurt. And maybe, just maybe, she was finally done with him. Emma stood, her legs shaky but steady enough to carry her. The morning light slipped through the blinds, casting long, muted shadows across the room. Emma stirred, but didn't rise right away. She lay in the quiet for several moments, letting the weight of the previous day settle in her chest. The silence felt different now, more peaceful, but it still carried the weight of so much left unresolved. She had made a choice, one that felt right in the moment but also left her with a hollow uncertainty. Could she really walk away from Daniel, from everything they had been? Could she start over after everything that had happened? The thought of facing her old life again, of going back to the house, to the life that felt foreign now, felt impossible. But she had to do it. She had to face the aftermath because running from it would only make her more lost. Sighing, she pushed herself up from the bed and walked to the bathroom. The mirror reflected a woman she barely recognized, her eyes red from crying, her face pale from the lack of sleep. But under it all, there was a faint spark, a small glimmer of determination. She had come so close to losing herself in the whirlpool of anger and hurt. But there was something left, something inside her that still wanted to move forward, even if she didn't know how. After a quick shower, she dressed in something simple and comfortable, an outfit that felt neutral, something that didn't scream Emma the wife or Emma the betrayed, but rather just Emma. She wasn't sure where she was going next. A part of her wanted to stay in the hotel room, hide away for a little longer, but she knew that wasn't the answer. She had to face it, whatever it was. Her phone buzzed again, and her stomach twisted at the thought of Daniel's name flashing across the screen once more. Instead, she saw a message from Julia. "I know what you're thinking. You're angry, hurt, and you probably hate me. But I want you to know I never meant for any of this to happen. I was lost too, and I'm sorry. Please, when you're ready, we can talk." The message hit harder than she anticipated. Julia, her best friend, the person she'd trusted with everything, the person who had been a constant in her life for years. The betrayal had been one thing, but this message felt like the final straw. It was her attempt to regain control, to keep the door open, for reconciliation. But Emma wasn't sure if there was anything left worth salvaging. She couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped her. Lost, too? Julia wasn't the one who had been betrayed, who had been gasping for breath under the weight of lies and deceit. Emma put the phone down, not bothering to respond immediately. She needed space, time to think, time to breathe. She couldn't afford to engage in the emotional tug-of-war right now. She had to focus on herself. She grabbed her bag and walked out of the hotel room, stepping into the cool morning air. The city around her felt alive, bustling, indifferent to the storm brewing within her. She thought about calling a friend, but no one really knew what she was going through, not the way she needed them to. They all had their own lives, their own baggage. This was hers to carry. Her thoughts swirled in circles as she wandered aimlessly down the street. The decision to leave Daniel had felt decisive last night, but now it felt uncertain, like a choice that could unravel at any moment. Maybe she was being hasty. Maybe it was all too soon. But in the pit of her stomach, she knew it wasn't just the hurt talking. It was something deeper, a voice she hadn't heard in a long time, the part of her that had once known her own worth. She wasn't just some chapter in someone else's life to be tossed aside when it got inconvenient. She didn't need Daniel or Julia to define her. She needed herself back. Her phone buzzed again, and this time she didn't hesitate. It was a message from her mother. "Emma, I know you're going through a lot right now, but I just want you to remember that you are strong. You don't have to go through this alone. We're all here for you." It was a small, steady reminder that despite everything, she wasn't truly alone. Her mother, though sometimes overbearing, had always been a rock for her. It was strange to feel comforted by the simplest of words. She put the phone away and kept walking, trying to clear her mind. She didn't know how to make sense of everything, but maybe she didn't have to just yet. Maybe she just had to take it one step at a time, one decision at a time, without forcing the answers to come too quickly. Her thoughts were interrupted when she spotted a small cafe on the corner, the kind that had the faint hum of life, of quiet conversations and laughter drifting through the windows. Something about the place seemed inviting, calming. She stepped inside and ordered a coffee, taking a seat by the window. The cafe was a little world of its own. It was warm, bright, and full of people who didn't know her name and didn't need to. She sipped her coffee slowly, letting the steam rise around. The walk back to her apartment felt different, lighter somehow. She had spent so much time dwelling on the wreckage of the past few days that she hadn't realized how heavy it had become, how the weight of unanswered questions and unspoken words had seeped into every part of her life. But now, in the stillness of the early afternoon, Emma felt a strange sense of clarity washing over her, though it was fragile and fleeting. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Daniel. His name flashed on the screen, the message preview reading, "I don't know how to fix this, but I want to try." She froze. A part of her wanted to ignore it, to throw the phone in the nearest trash can and never look back. But she didn't. Not yet. Instead, she opened the message, her fingers hovering above the keys for a long moment. What could she say? Could anything he said be enough to undo what had already been broken? "I don't know what to say, Daniel. I don't know if I even want to fix this anymore." She typed it, then deleted it, then typed it again. The truth was, she was lost. She didn't want to be angry forever, but she couldn't forget how his betrayal had cut into the fabric of everything they had built together. She loved him. But could she still trust him? Could they even return to a place where the cracks weren't constantly showing? Before she could decide on a response, a soft buzz startled her again. This time, it was a notification from her therapist. She had almost forgotten about their appointment. Reminder, therapy session tomorrow at 3 p.m. Emma took a deep breath. It was strange how all the pieces of her life seemed to converge in a single moment. Therapy, Daniel's message, her mother's support, the quiet cafe. She had always thought of herself as someone who could handle things on her own, who didn't need anyone's help. But now, she realized she needed more than she was willing to admit. She pressed the phone to her chest for a moment, her thoughts swirling, before texting Daniel back. "We need space, Daniel. I need space to think, to figure out who I am without this, without you. Maybe that's the only way we can ever have a chance." It was the hardest thing she'd ever written, even though the words felt true. The part of her that wanted to forgive, that wanted to pretend things could go back to the way they were, was still there. But the part of her that had been betrayed, that had seen how easily the trust they'd built had been shattered, was much louder. Emma slipped her phone back into her bag and kept walking, determined to reclaim the parts of herself that had been lost in the fog of heartbreak. She didn't know what the future held, didn't know if she would ever be able to fully forgive Daniel, or if the silence between them would stretch until it became permanent. But what she did know was that she had the power to shape her own story. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick. But she had already started the process of rebuilding. By the time she reached her apartment, the city was bathed in the soft golden glow of late afternoon. She stood for a moment in front of the building, looking up at the windows that were now home to only the faintest echoes of the life she'd known. She had lived here with Daniel, in this place that used to feel like a sanctuary. Now it felt empty, but maybe that was okay. The door clicked open as she entered, and she paused, taking a slow, deliberate breath. Her apartment was silent. No voices, no footsteps. just the hum of city life outside the window. She moved into the living room and sat down on the couch, her fingers running over the fabric. There had been so many times in the past few days when she had imagined leaving, just packing a bag and never coming back. But now, she wasn't so sure that leaving was the answer. Maybe staying with herself, staying in her life, was the bigger challenge. Her phone buzzed again, but she ignored it for now. There was nothing more to say to Daniel at this moment. Her mind wandered to the therapy session tomorrow. It was a small thing, but it was a step. A commitment to facing the mess, to understanding herself again. She closed her eyes for a moment, imagining the future. Not with Daniel, not with anyone, just her, standing on her own. It was strange, the thought of existing without a defined role, without being someone's wife or someone's friend. She had spent so long letting the world around her tell her who she was. It was time for her to decide. And for the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. It was small, but it was there. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't need to. The future, whatever it looked like, was hers to write. When the phone buzzed again this time, she didn't hesitate. She picked it up and, without looking, at the screen, pressed end, and then she set it down, standing up to face her future one step at a time. The next morning, Emma awoke early, the sunlight casting soft patterns across her bedroom walls. It had been a restless night, filled with thoughts and flashes of old memories, some warm and comforting, others sharp and cutting. But when the alarm went off, there was a strange stillness in her. Today was the day she would take another step, a real one. The therapy session wasn't just another task. It was her commitment to figuring out who she was beyond the wreckage. She took a shower, the hot water soothing the tension in her muscles. When she finished, she stood in front of the mirror for a long moment, staring at her reflection. She looked different, more tired, more worn, but also, in a strange way, more sure of herself. She didn't have all the answers, but she was determined to find them. After getting dressed in something comfortable but put together, she grabbed her keys and her purse, heading out the door. The streets were still quiet at this time of morning, the rush of the city just beginning to stir as people hurried off to work. Emma's steps felt deliberate as she made her way to the subway station, a sense of resolve forming within her. The therapist's office wasn't far, but as she entered the building, she felt a nervous flutter in her chest. It was a step into the unknown, a space where she didn't have control, where the truth might come out in ways she wasn't ready to face. As she walked into the waiting room, she was greeted by the receptionist with a friendly smile. Emma forced one in return, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. The small talk, the quiet hum of a phone ringing in the background, all felt distant, as if she were in a different world from everyone else. A few minutes later, her therapist, Dr. Lawrence, called her name. Emma stood, taking a deep breath, and followed him into the office. The room was cozy, soft light, comfortable chairs, a box of tissues within reach. It was the kind of room that felt safe, but there was a weight to it now. She had never been sure what to expect from therapy, and now, with everything that had happened, she felt unsure of herself again. Dr. Lawrence sat down across from her, his expression neutral but kind. He didn't rush her. He gave her time to settle into the chair before he spoke. "How are you feeling, Emma?" he asked, his voice steady. She glanced at him, unsure of how to answer. There were so many ways to say it. She could say she was angry, hurt, confused. She could say she was exhausted, on the edge of breaking. But that wouldn't be the truth. Not all of it. "I don't know," she finally said, her voice small, like it had lost its strength. "I feel like I'm standing on the edge of something, but I can't see what's on the other side. And it scares me." Dr. Lawrence nodded, his gaze thoughtful. Fear is a powerful emotion, but it can also be a guide. You're at a crossroads, Emma. You've been through something painful, and it's hard to see the way forward. But you're already doing the work. By being here, you're showing up for yourself. Emma swallowed, her eyes prickling with unshed tears. She had wanted to be strong, but the tears kept coming, a steady, quiet stream that she didn't try to stop. "I don't know what to do with all this anger," she said, her voice trembling now. "It's not just the betrayal, it's everything. It's the way I've been living, the way I've been letting myself be someone's wife or someone's friend, but never just me. I've been so focused on making things work, on keeping things together, that I lost myself." Dr. Lawrence leaned forward, his tone gentle but firm. "It's okay to be angry. Anger can be a protective response, but it also holds power. What do you think that anger is telling you?" Emma wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. "That I'm not okay with what happened, that I'm not okay with how everything just fell apart. I'm angry at Daniel, but I'm also angry at myself, for not seeing the signs, for ignoring things, and I'm scared that I'll never be able to trust anyone again." The words hung in the air, heavy and raw. She hadn't realized how much she'd been holding inside until she spoke them out loud. Dr. Lawrence didn't rush to offer reassurance or answers. He let the silence stretch for a moment, allowing Emma the space to feel what she was feeling. "It sounds like you're grieving," he said softly. "Not just the betrayal, but the version of yourself you thought you knew. It's normal to mourn that loss. But there's also the possibility of healing, of becoming someone else, someone stronger." "Perhaps," Emma took a deep breath. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to rebuild all of this. My marriage, my life. I don't know how to trust again, how to forgive." "And that's okay," Dr. Lawrence replied, his voice steady. "You don't have to have the answers right now. This is a process. And healing, like rebuilding, takes time. But it's within you. The strength to move forward, even without the answers, is already there." The next few days passed in a blur of emotions, waves of anger, grief, and surprisingly, moments of calm. Emma hadn't heard from Daniel again since their last exchange, and part of her was relieved. She wasn't ready for the complicated mess of his words, his apologies, his promises. The quiet left room for her to breathe, to finally process everything without the distraction of his presence or the weight of his guilt pressing against her. The therapy session had been a turning point. The rawness of it, the way she was finally able to articulate her pain, had given her a sense of clarity, but that didn't mean she was any closer to a decision about what to do with her marriage, or with Daniel. Instead of dwelling on the inevitable confrontation, she kept her focus on the small victories, making it through a day without completely unraveling, returning to her yoga classes, allowing herself a night of peaceful sleep without dreaming of betrayal. She spent her evenings reading, a practice she had neglected for months, and rediscovered the joy of quiet moments spent with her own thoughts. But there were times, late at night, when she lay in bed alone, that the silence felt like a suffocating presence. The echo of what had happened, of what she had lost, crept into her mind, no matter how hard she tried to push it away. One evening, as Emma sat in her living room with a cup of tea, the doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her heart skipped a beat. She opened the door cautiously, her pulse quickening when she saw who stood on the other side. It was Daniel. He looked different, slightly disheveled, like he hadn't been sleeping well, his eyes tired but earnest. He held something in his hand, a small box wrapped in simple brown paper, with a ribbon loosely tied around it. "Emma," he said softly, his voice hoarse. "I know I don't have the right to ask anything of you, but I need you to hear me out. Please!" Her instincts screamed at her to close the door, to retreat into the safety of her space and her silence. But she couldn't. She just couldn't. So, reluctantly, she stepped aside, allowing him to enter. They stood in the living room for a long, uncomfortable moment, neither knowing how to begin. Daniel was the first to speak, though his words came out in a hesitant rush. "I've been thinking about everything, about what I did, and I know that nothing I can say will undo it. I know that I shattered your trust, and I hate myself for it. But I need you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen." "You mean everything to me, Emma, everything." His eyes searched hers, desperate for some sign, any sign, that she might still feel something for him beyond the hurt. Emma remained silent, trying to control the rush of conflicting emotions that churned inside her. I don't know how to fix this," Daniel continued, swallowing hard. "But I need you to know that I am willing to do whatever it takes. I've been seeing a counselor. I'm trying to understand why I made the choices I did, and I know I don't deserve it. But I'm asking for a chance. One chance to prove that I can change, that we can figure this out." Emma's gaze flickered to the small box he was holding, its presence a quiet reminder of the countless gestures, the tokens of affection that had once meant something between them. But now it all felt hollow. She couldn't bring herself to care about the box or the apology. She cared about the betrayal, about the lies, about the years of trust that had been turned to dust. But there was a part of her, deep down, that still wanted to believe him. Still wanted to hear that everything could go back to how it was before. It was painful, but it was true. She wanted the old version of their life back, even if she knew logically that it was impossible. "What is that?" she asked, her voice betraying the crack of vulnerability she hadn't realized was there. Daniel hesitated before handing her the box, his eyes never leaving her face. It's not much, but I thought maybe it could be a start. An apology in a way. A symbol. I don't know. I just want to show you that I'm serious." Emma looked at the box in her hands, torn between wanting to dismiss it and the part of her that wondered if perhaps it held some meaning she wasn't ready to face. She opened it slowly. Inside was a small framed photo of her and Daniel, taken on a trip they'd taken to the coast years ago. They were laughing, their arms around each other, the sunlight gleaming off the water behind them. It was a memory. From a time before things got complicated, before they lost themselves in the routine of their marriage, before the cracks began to show. For a moment, Emma couldn't breathe. The photograph was a reminder of what had once been so simple, so real. But it was also a reminder of the distance between them now, of what had been broken. She set the box down on the coffee table, her hands trembling. "I don't know what you want from me, Daniel." The days that followed Daniel's visit passed slowly, each one a blur of fleeting moments and unanswered questions. Emma found herself caught between the remnants of the love she had for her husband and the raw, jagged edges of the betrayal that lingered. It was like trying to untangle an impossible knot in her chest, each thread representing a part of her heart, now twisted and torn. She went through the motions, functioning in the world but detached from it, as if she were floating just above the surface. The work she had once found fulfilling now felt insignificant. Her conversations with friends, once easy and comforting, felt like scripted performances. She laughed when expected, nodded when needed, but inside, she was weighed down with the decision that loomed over her, whether to try to heal with Daniel or to let go and move on. The photo that Daniel had left her sat on the table, a constant reminder of the past that seemed both impossibly distant and heartbreakingly close. She picked it up occasionally, tracing the edges of the frame with her fingers, but each time she did, the ache deepened. It was a reminder of who they had been, and of who they were now, fractured beyond recognition. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Emma found herself standing in front of her bathroom mirror, staring at the woman she saw there. There was a weariness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She barely recognized the reflection. Her features were the same, but her spirit felt different, heavier. The woman in the mirror looked unsure, uncertain. She wasn't sure who she was anymore or what she wanted. Her phone buzzed, breaking her out of her trance. It was a message from her sister, Lily. "How are you holding up?" Emma hesitated for a moment, then typed back, trying to figure it out. She thought about the conversation they'd had weeks ago, before everything had exploded. Lily had been the first person to sense the shift in Emma's relationship with Daniel, though Emma had pushed her suspicions away at the time. She had always believed in the sanctity of her marriage, in the idea that love could weather anything. But now she didn't know what to believe. A moment later, Lily replied, "You don't have to figure this out alone, Em. You've got me, and I'm here, no matter what." Emma sat back down on the edge of the bed, the phone slipping from her hand onto the covers. She had always believed that her sister's unconditional support was one of the constants in her life, something she could always rely on. But now, even Lily's words didn't offer the comfort they once had. Emma wasn't sure who she was anymore, and she wasn't sure how to allow anyone, even her sister, to help her find her way back. The next day, as Emma walked to her car, a thought crossed her mind, sudden and unexpected. What if I leave? It was a fleeting thought, one she quickly dismissed. But then it lingered, curling its way into her mind, questioning her certainty. What if she walked away from everything? From Daniel, from the life they had built together, from the life she had been clinging to, hoping it would all somehow go back to normal. She shook the thought away, but it refused to leave. By the time she returned home that evening, Emma felt a restless energy building inside her. She was unsure of what she wanted, but she knew she couldn't stay in this place forever. She couldn't continue to live in this limbo, constantly circling the question of whether to fight for her marriage or let it go. She needed to make a decision. She needed to know once and for all whether there was a future for them. She called Daniel that night. Her heart pounded in her chest as the phone rang, each ring stretching the tension between them. It was the first time she had reached out since his last visit. "Hello." Daniel's voice was hesitant, almost like he was afraid she would change her mind before she could say what she needed to. "Can we talk?" she said, her voice steady, despite the nerves twisting in her stomach. I think I need to hear you out. One more time." There was a pause on the other end. Then, "Of course. I'll come over." The weight was unbearable. Emma sat in the living room, picking at the edges of her nails, trying to calm the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. She thought about the way Daniel had looked when he left the other night, the desperation in his eyes. She had never seen him like that before, not in all the years they had been together. When he finally arrived, there was a new energy in the air, a sense of finality. Neither of them spoke at first, both waiting for the other to make the first move. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about us, about the way we've been living for the last few months. I know I've made mistakes, Emma. I know I hurt you in ways I can't take back. But I've been working on myself. I've been thinking a lot about the future." The days that followed Daniel's visit were a blur for Emma. Time seemed to stretch and fold on itself, each moment suspended between the past and the unknown future. She spent long hours walking through her neighborhood, the crisp autumn air, biting at her skin, but it did nothing to soothe the gnawing ache deep inside her. Her thoughts, once scattered and chaotic, now had a singular focus. How could she move forward? How could she reconcile the woman she was before the betrayal and the woman she was becoming now? The decision seemed impossible. Every path she considered led to more pain. Letting go of Daniel felt like cutting off a part of herself, but staying felt like living a lie. It wasn't until a weekend afternoon when the sunlight filtered through the windows and the house seemed too quiet that Emma finally decided to speak with someone outside of Daniel. She couldn't keep holding everything inside. She needed a sounding board. She dialed Lily's number, her fingers trembling slightly as she pressed the call button. She had kept so much from her sister, not wanting to burden her with the mess of her failing marriage, but now she felt like she had no choice. Lily answered on the third ring. "Hey, sis, how's it going?" Emma exhaled, forcing the words out. "Can we talk? I need to, I don't know, sort through some stuff." There was a pause, and then Lily's voice softened. "Of course. I'll be there in 20. True to her word, Lily arrived just after Emma had finished putting together a cup of tea. They sat down in the living room, the weight of the conversation hanging between them like an invisible force. Emma was thankful that her sister didn't push her for details immediately. She knew her well enough to understand that Emma needed time to find the right words. Finally, Emma broke the silence. "I don't know if I can forgive him, Lil. I don't know if I can trust him again. But at the same time, I don't know if I want to let go. It feels like I'm stuck between two worlds." Lily nodded, her gaze intense as she listened. "You don't have to have all the answers right now, but you also don't have to carry this alone. You don't owe anyone forgiveness, especially when you're not sure if you're ready to give it. But you also have to ask yourself, what do you need, Emma? Not what Daniel needs. Not what anyone else expects from you. What do you need to feel whole again?" Emma looked at her sister, feeling the lump in her throat swell. It wasn't a question she had asked herself directly. What did she need? Could she heal if she stayed? Or would it be a never-ending wound? Could she move past the betrayal, or was the damage too deep? "I don't even know who I am without him anymore," Emma whispered, the vulnerability in her voice raw. "We've been together so long it feels like I'd be losing myself if I let go." Lily leaned forward, taking her hand. "I get that. But you're not just defined by him, and you never were. You're strong, Em. You always have been. Whatever happens, you'll find your way through this. But you have to be true to yourself. Don't stay because you think you should. Stay because it's what you want, not what you think you owe." Emma nodded, but the words didn't quite take root in her heart yet. She felt as if she were standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into the darkness, unsure of what lay beyond. That night, after Lily had left, Emma sat at the kitchen table with a glass of wine, staring at the phone in her hands. She had tried to reach out to Daniel earlier, but her finger hovered over the screen, uncertain whether to call or send another message. When the phone finally rang, Emma startled, her heart leaping into her throat. She glanced at the caller ID, Daniel, taking. "A deep breath," she answered. "Hi." "Hi," Daniel said softly, the strain in his voice unmistakable. "I know things have been tense. I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. I don't want to push you, Em, but I miss you. I miss us." Her chest tightened. She could feel the sincerity in his voice, but it did little to ease the storm of emotions raging inside her. "I'm trying, Daniel. I'm trying to figure out what I need, what we need." "I know," he said quickly. "I just want you to know that I'm not giving up on us. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I know I can't change the past, but I can work for a better future. If you'll let me." Emma closed her eyes, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that they could rebuild, that the love they had could survive the betrayal, the lies. But part of her feared that any attempt to fix what was broken would only leave them more shattered. "I don't know if I'm ready, Daniel," she whispered. "I don't know if I can." There was a long pause before he spoke again. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait. I just want you to know that I'm here." After hanging up, Emma sat alone in the kitchen, her hand still clutching the phone. As the days continued to stretch on, Emma began to find small, fleeting moments of peace in her solitude. The ache in her chest never fully went away, but it dulled with time, like a wound that, while still open, had begun to scab over. She threw herself into work, allowing the distractions of daily life to fill the gaps in her heart. But the silence at home was always there, pressing down on her with a quiet, oppressive weight. Daniel called again and again, his voice soft and regretful, each time carrying that same desperate edge that cut deeper into her soul. She could hear the uncertainty in his words, the fragile hope that he could somehow undo the damage that had been done. But each time, Emma's resolve grew stronger. She wasn't sure if she could forgive him, and she wasn't sure if she could move on, but she had to decide. No more stalling. One evening, while she was sitting in the living room, an email notification flashed across her phone. The subject line read, "Regarding your request, divorce proceedings." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She had filled out the forms weeks ago, but hadn't gone any further. It had been an impulsive decision in the midst of everything, an attempt to assert some control over a situation that felt completely out of her hands. She opened the email. The law firm had provided her with next steps, a consultation with an attorney, the possibility of moving forward. There was a slight tremor in her hands as she clicked on the link to schedule the appointment. That night, after much hesitation, she texted Daniel, "We need to talk." The message was brief, but it felt like it carried the weight of her entire future. She couldn't keep hiding from this, from the truth that had been creeping up on her. He replied within minutes, "Okay. When?" Emma stared at the phone for a moment. Her thumb hovered over the screen. For the first time in weeks, she made a decision. Tomorrow. When Daniel arrived the following evening, his expression was different. It wasn't the pleading desperation of before. There was a new weight to his eyes, an acceptance of the distance between them that hadn't been there before. He had heard the finality in her message. He knew the time had come. "Hey," he said quietly, walking into the living room. His usual confident stance had softened, as if the very act of stepping inside was a silent admission of his vulnerability. "I'm here. What's going on, Emma?" She didn't respond right away, unsure of what to say. She needed him to hear her. Words needed him to understand that this wasn't just about the affair, it was about everything. The lies, the silence, the walls that had grown so high between them over the years. The betrayal had cracked the foundation of their relationship, but it was everything else that had made it impossible to rebuild. "Daniel, Emma hesitated, trying to steady her breathing. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about us, and I realized something." He took a step forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "What is it?" "I'm not sure I can keep doing this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm not sure I can keep pretending that everything will go back to the way it was. It's not just about the affair. It's about the fact that we stopped talking to each other a long time ago." Daniel flinched as if the words were physical blows. "I know. I've been thinking about that too. It's not just about what I did to you. It's about everything we let slide. I'm sorry, Emma. So sorry." She nodded, though the ache inside her didn't fade. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she admitted. "I thought I could. I wanted to. But I can't pretend that nothing happened. And I don't know how to move forward. I don't know if I even want to." There was silence between them for a long moment. It was the kind of silence that said everything but nothing at all. Daniel's hands clenched at his sides, his lips parted as if he were trying to find the right words, but nothing came. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. I don't want to lose you, Emma, but I won't force you to stay. I need you to know that I will be here, no matter what you decide. I'll wait if I have to, but I won't push you." Emma swallowed, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. She had loved him once, loved him in a way that made every part of her life feel connected to his. But now it felt as though she were standing on the edge of something bigger than their marriage, something more terrifying than her own heartache. The decision wasn't just about them anymore. It was about who she was, and who she was becoming in the midst of all the pain. "I've been thinking about filing for divorce," Emma finally said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to keep it steady. "I've already started the process. I don't know if that's the right decision, but I think it's the only one I can make right now." Daniel's face twisted, and for a moment, months passed, marked by seasons changing outside her window and the quiet, steady hum of routine. Emma began to rebuild her life piece by piece, learning to navigate the world on her own terms. The divorce proceedings were slow, but moved forward, with a sense of finality that both hurt and healed. Each paper signed, each meeting attended, felt like another layer of the past being peeled away, revealing the raw, vulnerable self she had buried beneath the years of deceit and pain. Daniel respected her wishes for distance, though his messages would occasionally appear, lingering in her inbox like ghosts of a life she was trying to leave behind. Sometimes she would read them. Other times she would let them fade into the digital void, unanswered. He wrote of regret, of his longing for her forgiveness, of his desire to make things right. But the words felt hollow, echoes of a promise that had already been broken too many times. One evening, she sat in her living room, surrounded by moving boxes. She had decided to sell the house, the place where so many memories had been made and shattered. The rooms were now stripped bare, void of the life they had once held. She ran her fingers over the empty bookshelf, remembering the nights they spent curled up together, lost in their favorite stories, before the truth had shattered everything. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Daniel standing there, his shoulders slumped, eyes weary. He looked thinner, his face etched with lines she hadn't noticed before. There was a brokenness to him that mirrored her own, and for a moment they stood in silence, two people who had loved and lost and hurt each other beyond measure. "I heard you're selling the house," he said, his voice low, almost fragile. Emma nodded, her fingers tightening on the doorframe. "It's time. I can't stay here anymore." He looked around, his eyes lingering on the empty walls. "I thought maybe we could talk. One last time. There are things I need to say." She hesitated, every instinct telling her to protect herself, to guard the pieces she had just started to put back together. But she also knew she needed closure, to hear the words that had been left unspoken. "Okay," she said, stepping aside to let him in. They sat on the floor of the living room, surrounded by boxes and the remnants of a life they had built together. It felt strangely fitting, this conversation taking place amidst the ruins of their marriage. Daniel took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the floor. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I know I destroyed everything. But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. Even when I was doing the worst things imaginable, I loved you." Emma felt a lump rise in her throat, her eyes stinging. "You don't hurt the people you love, Daniel." "I know." His voice broke, his hands trembling. "I was weak. I was selfish. I was looking for something to fill the emptiness inside me. And I didn't realize I was destroying the one good thing I had." She looked at him, seeing the raw vulnerability in his eyes, the regret that seemed to weigh him down. She believed him. She believed that he loved her, that he was sorry. But love and regret weren't enough to undo the damage, to erase the lies. "I loved you too," she said, her voice cracking. "I loved you with everything I had. And you broke me, Daniel. You broke us." A tear slid down his cheek, his shoulders, sagging under the weight of her words. "I wish I could take it all back. I wish I could be the man you deserved." Emma felt her heart splintering, the pain rushing back with an intensity that took her breath away. "You can't," she whispered. "No matter how much we want to, we can't go back." They sat in silence, the air heavy with grief and lost. Dreams. Emma wiped her eyes, taking a shaky breath. "I'm trying to move on. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you. But I need to find a way to let go." Daniel looked at her, his face crumpling with pain. "I understand. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. For everything." She nodded, her heart aching. "I know." They sat there for a while, saying nothing, just existing in the same space one last time. It felt like the end of something monumental, the closing of a chapter that had defined them both. Eventually, Daniel stood up, his movements heavy. He looked at her one last time, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Take care of yourself, Emma." "You too," she whispered, her voice barely audible. And then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click that seemed to echo through the empty house. Emma sat there, staring at the place where he had been, feeling the hollow ache of goodbye settle deep within her. She let herself cry then, for all the years they had loved and lost each other, for the dreams that would never be realized, for the life she was leaving behind. She cried until there were no tears left, until her body was exhausted and her heart felt empty. Emma stood on the front porch, the cool breeze whispering through her hair as she locked the door for the last time. She ran her fingers over the cold metal, her hand lingering for just a moment before letting go. It felt like closing a chapter, sealing away everything that had happened within those walls. The love, the laughter, the lies, and the pain. She walked to her car, the gravel crunching beneath her feet, and glanced back once more at the house that had been her home for so many years. The windows stared back, hollow and empty, like the eyes of a ghost. But she didn't feel haunted. Not anymore. It was just a house, just bricks and mortar. The memories would stay with her, but they no longer defined her. As she drove away, she didn't look back. Her heart felt heavy, but also strangely light, as if she were leaving behind not just a place, but an entire life. A life that no longer fit who she was becoming. The city unfolded around her. Familiar streets bathed in the golden hues of dusk. A world she had once shared with Daniel, but was now navigating alone. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. She glanced over, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the name. Lauren. Her best friend, her confidant, the person who had stood by her through every painful revelation. Emma put the call on speaker. "Hey, I just heard from the realtor." "The offer went through," Lauren said, her voice bright with relief. "It's official. You're free. Free." The word echoed in Emma's mind, bittersweet and beautiful. "Yeah, I guess I am." "Are you okay?" Emma looked at the sky, the sun dipping below the horizon, painting everything in shades of orange and pink. "I think so. It's weird. I thought I'd feel more, I don't know, sad. But I just feel done." "That's because you are. You've been through hell, and you came out the other side. I'm so proud of you, Em." A tear slipped down her cheek, and she wiped it away, smiling through the sadness. "Thanks, Lauren. I don't know what I would have done without you." "Well, lucky for you, I'm not going anywhere, and neither is that guest room. You're staying with me until you find your own place." Emma laughed, the sound surprising her. It felt good, light, and genuine. "I promise I won't overstay my welcome." "You could never. Besides, who else is going to binge-watch trashy reality shows with me?" Emma's smile widened. I guess I'm stuck with you then. Damn right. Lauren paused, her tone softening. Did you get to say goodbye? Emma's chest tightened. Yeah, he came by the house. Today. And we talked. It was hard, but I needed to hear him say he was sorry. I needed to say goodbye. Do you think you'll ever forgive him? Emma thought about it, her fingers tightening on the steering wheel. I don't know. Maybe someday. But not today. That's okay. Healing takes time, and you don't owe him anything. I know. Emma glanced at the road ahead, the city lights twinkling in the distance, like tiny stars guiding her towards something new. I just want to move forward. I don't want to be angry anymore. You will. You're already doing it. Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest, gratitude washing over her. Thank you, Lauren, for everything. You never have. To thank me. I love you, Em. Always. I love you too. They hung up, and Emma drove on, the city unfolding before her, alive with possibility. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid. She was stronger than she had realized, braver than she had given herself credit for. She had faced betrayal, heartbreak, and the shattering of everything she once believed in, and she was still standing. The journey wasn't over. There would still be days of pain, moments of doubt, but there would also be laughter, joy, and new beginnings. She was ready to discover who she could become, beyond the hurt, beyond the past. Emma drove toward the city, her heart a mix of sorrow and hope, the road stretching out before her, a path to a future she was finally ready to embrace. And this time, she was writing her own story. Weeks passed, and Emma settled into her new routine, living with Lauren in her cozy apartment on the edge of the city. It was a far cry from the suburban home she once shared with Daniel, but it felt safe, like a sanctuary where she could rebuild herself piece by piece. She started a new job at a nonprofit, throwing herself into work that felt meaningful, helping people who needed a voice, a second chance. In many ways, she was helping herself too, rediscovering her own worth. It was exhausting, but also exhilarating, a reminder that she was more than just a broken heart. One Friday evening, as she curled up on the couch with a bowl of popcorn and Lauren by her side, her phone buzzed, a message from Daniel. She stared at it, her stomach twisting. Can we talk? I miss you. Lauren noticed her hesitation. What's up? It's him, Emma whispered, her voice heavy. He wants to talk. Lauren's face hardened. After everything he put you through? Emma looked at the message, her heart conflicted. I don't know. Maybe I need closure. Maybe he does too. Lauren sighed, her shoulders softening. Just be careful, okay? You don't owe him anything. I know. Emma put the phone down, her chest tight. I'll think about it. The decision lingered in her mind for days. She replayed the memories, the laughter they once shared, the way his betrayal had shattered her. But she also remembered his tears that day in the house, the regret in his eyes. She didn't know if she believed him, but she needed to hear him out, for herself, not for him. They met at a small cafe, neutral ground. Emma arrived early, choosing a corner table where she could see the door. Her hands trembled as she wrapped them around her coffee mug, the warmth grounding her. When Daniel walked in, he looked thinner, his eyes tired. For a moment, she almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Hey, he said, his voice cautious. Thanks for meeting me. She nodded. I almost didn't. He sat down, his shoulders hunched. I know I don't deserve your time, but I needed to see you. Emma watched him, her guard up. Why? His eyes met hers, raw and vulnerable. I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything, for hurting you, for lying, for ruining us. Her heart ached, the pain still fresh. Why did you do it? He looked down at his hands, shame coloring his face. I was selfish. I was stupid. I thought I wanted something more. But it was never about her. It was about me, my own insecurities, my own failures. That doesn't excuse what you did. I know, he whispered, his voice cracking. I lost the best thing that ever happened to me, and it's my fault. Emma felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them back. You broke me, Daniel. You shattered everything I believed in. He looked at her, pain etched on his face. I know, and I hate myself for it. I hate who I became. She wanted to scream at him, to make him feel the hurt he'd caused. But all she felt was exhaustion. I don't know if I can ever forgive you. He nodded, his shoulders slumping. I understand. I don't deserve it. I needed you to know I'm sorry. Silence hung between them, heavy and bittersweet. Emma searched his face, trying to find the man she once loved. He was there, somewhere beneath the guilt and regret, but he wasn't the same. And neither was she. I'm trying to move on, she said, her voice steady. I'm trying to rebuild my life. Without you. A flicker of pain crossed his face, but he nodded. I want you to be happy, even if it's not with me. Emma looked away, her eyes blurring. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. I wouldn't expect you to, he whispered. I miss you. I miss us. Her heart twisted, but she stood firm. The us you miss doesn't exist anymore, he flinched, the truth hitting him like a blow. I'm so sorry, Emma. I know, she said, her voice soft, but sorry doesn't fix it. She stood up, her body trembling. I need to go. Daniel looked up at her, his eyes pleading. Do you think we could ever be friends? She hesitated, the question cutting deep. She remembered the laughter, the warmth, the life they once shared, but she also remembered the betrayal, the lies, the nights she cried herself to sleep. I don't know, she whispered. Maybe someday, but not today. He nodded, his face crumbling. I understand. Emma turned and walked away, her heart heavy but her step strong. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Outside, the sun was setting, the sky painted with hues of pink and gold. Emma stood on the sidewalk, breathing in the cool evening air. It hurt, but it was also freeing. She had faced him, heard his apology, and walked away. It wasn't closure, not completely, but it was a step forward. As she walked toward her car, she felt a strange sense of peace. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she was ready to face it. She was stronger now, wiser. She was learning to let go one step at a time, and maybe, just maybe someday, she would find the courage to forgive.